WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into a great baseball season. We're going to talk some baseball in this segment. But before I do, I have to one last time let everybody know we're coming to Bel Air. Pappas, world famous crab cakes now in Bel Air, and shipping, of course, as all of our crab cake folks do. The Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by our friends at Window Nation, and of course, the Maryland Lottery. They got these new scratchers. I'm not giving these away. I'm going to be giving these away at Pappas and Bel Air. We're going to be there on Thursday from 2 until 5. Former Harford County Executive Barry Glassman's going to be coming by. Tim, who's running the joint's going to be sitting in talking about crab. The place is packed all the time, and they're making some room. And then I put in a shout out, like, to get a good Harford County gas, and the best I could come up with is Mickey Coachella. So Mickey's going to be coming out, doing his brand of comedy and my brand of comedy together, all presented by the Maryland Lottery and Window Nation. One guy that will not be with us because he is going to be busy with said baseball team as the appointed representative of WNST Baltimore Positive. Luke Jones joins us now. He is at Baltimore. Luke, he has been up late, but not too late when they start the games at 6:35 and they play rapido. Luke, are you getting home at an hour in Shrewsbury, Pennsylvania that you've not become accustomed to during midweek, weeknight games? And I don't even want to pick on the traffic. I mean, the fact that there weren't a lot of people there on an 80-degree night, business needs to pick up. But Grayson Rodriguez, right? Like, this is... I had lunch with Mike Elias. There's pictures and witnesses on Monday. Business is picking up, and as much as there's Lamar, and that heat's there, and the OBJ thing is enormous, the Orioles are doing things on a daily basis, including Ryan Mountcastle. And can I sing to you? Before I bring you on, I just want to sing to you. Every night there's a different star. That's the magic of Orioles baseball. Was that good? I feel like Kiko Garcia in 79.
That was good. That was good. Although I'd say Ryan Mountcastle, and I don't even throw a nod to Austin Hayes, they've kind of been the early stars more nights than not. I mean, certainly, I think Tuesday night, everyone expected the big story to be Grayson Rodriguez making his home debut. So much buzz for that, albeit not a huge crowd, but the people that were there were very much juiced up about that. And lo and behold, Ryan Mountcastle does something that had only been done 2 other times in the history of the franchise. You have to go back to Eddie Murray back in 1985 and Jim Gentile back in 1961. That fantastic, underrated, one of the great seasons in Orioles history, but got lost in the shuffle of Mantle Maris that summer, driving in 9 runs in one game. Ryan Mountcastle does that on Tuesday night and really stole the thunder of Grayson Rodriguez, who did some good things, but not a great start. And we'll get into that. But you drive in 9 runs in one game and you do some of the things that the Orioles have been doing at the plate. Certainly we can talk about the pitching needing to be better. The defense has been shaky early on, but they've been hitting the ball and they've been stealing bases and they've been funneling water in the dugout. Not the dong bong, but the Homer hose, they're officially calling it. But it's all adding up to, hey, they're having fun, and it's been a fun product, and they're off to not a fantastic start, but a solid start, and it's leading to entertaining television, or if you're in person, entertaining baseball on a nightly basis. And to your point, these 6:35 starts, although the first couple 6:35 starts have been 3-hour games, so it hasn't exactly haven't reaped the rewards too much, but it's certainly been some fun at the ballpark. And again, Ryan Mountcastle, what can you say when you drive in 9 runs and that grand slam that capped off the 9 RBI night absolutely clobbered over the left field wall. So they're hitting the ball. Certainly we could talk about some of the other things they need to improve on, but they're certainly hitting the baseball, especially at the top of that lineup.
All right, man, this is where I'm the old fart around here, and I was sitting amongst other old farts out at the CEO Club watching baseball and talking baseball with Mike Elias and TJ Brightman and Bill Weedell from CFG Bank. I appreciate, by the way, this is where Leonard Raskin gets a free plug with his crab mallet, because Leonard brought us in. By the way, this is not just a crab mallet, dude. This is a crab mallet with a beer opener. This is a ball. This is East Side. So I appreciate that. Appreciate Leonard Raskin, his sponsorship and all he does for us. But Jim Gentile, this is my 32nd year of Baltimore Sports Radio. despite what Chad Steele or Greg Bader might think of that. But as a historian here and as a child of 33rd Street, my father loved Jim Gentile. My father loved Gus Triandos. My father loved Don Larson. So, my dad, like, I didn't grow up in a place where my dad worshiped Brooks Robinson. My dad, like, Jim Mutchler. You know what I mean? My dad liked Lenny Moore, but he loved Odell Bracy. You know what I mean? Like, so my dad was much more about Jim Dwyer than he was Eddie Murray. You know what I mean? Like, my dad loved the last guy on the bench because I think that's the kind of athlete he was, and sort of that scrap iron, So Jim Gentile, my dad loved Jim Gentile. And when I went on the radio in the 90s, he was a guy that I think if you get the video in 91, the last day, I think he was here. He was a guy that came in a lot, right? And I believe he's still alive. I'm wikied. It feels like he is. Okay.
Yeah.
He called into the show and did some radio with me. And every time he came on, he was, Diamond Jim, you know what I mean? But more than that, he was engaged in the game in the 90s when Camden Yards was happening. And you could call him and talk a little ball with him. Dick Hall was local here, much like Palmer all these years later, still very engaged in baseball. He did the show with me. So he was my dad's favorite. So, my dad had a Jim Gentile baseball card. That's how much my dad loved Jim Gentile. So anytime he did the show is kind of special for me. So when I hear a name pop up like that, and I'm thinking reaching for these esoteric, 9 RBI nights in the modern era, it's kind of a nod to Oriole history that there's a lot of people that do remember. And I know Jim Palmer would, Ben McDonald, not so much on the broadcast, and maybe not the young guy who's calling the games as well, who it's still not John Miller to me. And I'm trying to get used to the radio, the TV, all of that, and getting back into the vibe of whatever they're trying to do. Good to see our old friend Rob Long on the broadcast, and even Scott Garceau the other night. But Jim Gentile, I hear his name. I like that. Makes me think of my dad.
No question. And as I mentioned, a nod to him, that 1961 season, go back and look at the numbers. And in most years, he might have won MVP. I mean, that's how great that season was.
Dude, the ball had to be juiced that year, right? Manuel Maris, right?
Expansion. I mean, sure. I mean, you could certainly.
Yeah, but I mean, the 61 season's kind of weird, like the 68 pitching season with Louis Tiant and Sammy. There's some years when you look at baseball, and I mean, anybody that would look at Sammy Sosa's numbers or like,
yeah,
they're
that's a little different, but yeah,
the arc of baseball history, right?
No question. But yeah, Jim Gentile, and in that game, he hit a grand slam in back-to-back innings. I want to say it was the first and the second inning. He hit grand slams. So Eddie Murray had a 3-home run game in 1985 that was out in Anaheim. So Ryan Mountcastle doing what he did. And look, Oakland's terrible. I mean, they're the only team in baseball that has a lower payroll than the Orioles. But you look at that roster compared to the Orioles and you say, okay, the Orioles have all these young players who look like they could be budding superstars, or at least guys that are going to be legitimate, good major leaguers. Oakland, other than a couple guys, I mean, that cupboard is pretty bare. So you want to do what the Orioles did to them on Tuesday night. So, Ryan Mountcastle doing what he did, like I said, just absolutely clobbered the grand slam, longest home run of his career. I think it was right around 450 feet. So, I mean, it was a fun night at the ballpark. You would have liked to have seen Grayson Rodriguez pitch a little bit better. If you watched it, it was one of those starts where, there were a lot of good things, a lot of things to like, but he gave up 6 hits. All of those hits, Nestor, came on either an 0-2 count or a 1-2 count. And you know what that tells me? That tells me this is a guy who's graduated from the minors and now is developing at the next level. We always think of these guys arriving from the minor leagues, especially top prospects, and you always have this idea that they're a finished product, and they're not. They're going to continue to learn and develop at the major league level. So even though Grayson Rodriguez, you look at the final line, it wasn't very good, although certainly Austin Both coming in relief made the line look worse. But I think it was a case of some of the things that he probably did in AAA and AA that he would have gotten away with and gotten strikeouts or weak contact. If you're not as precise, if you're leaving balls over the plate, in those 0-2 or 1-2 counts at the major league level, yes, even the Oakland A's will make you pay at times. So I think that's part of the learning experience for him. But as we talk about that in the big picture sense, certainly Mountcastle and also Austin Hayes hitting in the leadoff spot against a left-handed starter boy, they were fantastic at the plate and throwing a little Adley Rutschman as well, getting on base. And it led to an Orioles 12-8 victory as they continue to swing the bats well at the top of the lineup, especially.
You don't accuse me of being a baseball nerd, but I swear to God I am, and that's how all this thing got built, to be really honest with you. I need to reiterate that because in 1985, I remember the Eddie Murray night, and it was monumental,
Mhm.
right? I was working at the News American then, so I mean, I remember summer nights answering the phone, trying to make my way in the world and get a job. At 6 months later, I wound up at some, but a couple years later, I saw Eddie Murray. I thought I saw him hit 3 home runs at the Vet. And it was literally the day that I was named Nasty Nestor by Rasig's kids. And it had to do with Todd Froworth, who later on became a friend of mine. But Eddie only hit two that day. I went up to the Vet to see Eddie Murray
Okay.
play. It was in 1989, May 14th, 1989. People ask what the day I got nicknamed Nasty Nestor. It was that day. It was a baseball bet that I made with Mike Resigliano, legendary artist, that I would babysit his kids if he could name the relief pitchers that came in out of the Phillies bullpen, because I had never heard of any of these guys. And they got lit up, and the Dodgers won 9-0. The Dodgers beat the Phillies 9-0. Oral Hershiser threw a two-hit shutout at the Vet. And the lineup, Willie Randolph was in that lineup, Mike Marshall, Eddie Murray, Mike Scioscia, John T-Bone Shelby, Jeff Hamilton, Dave Anderson. That's the Dodgers lineup. But Eddie only hit 2 bombs that day. I thought he hit 3. Eddie hit a lot of bombs, dude. You know what I mean? So you remember you remember when Eddie got into one, right? So Luke Jones is here. He's modern. He's a little bit modern. I'm a little bit old fashioned, even though I have the old hair. We're talking some Orioles baseball here this week. And I guess more than anything, for you to be at the ballpark and vibe it out, not a lot of people. Grayson Rodriguez there for that. Went okay for a little while, control issues. Certainly you hope it's better than this. And it's been yippee in spring training, right? I mean, I think there's been a little bit of this question about him. I just hope wherever he is on May 15th, it's in a good spot for him and for the organization because you know, there's a lot of hope in him. People are coming down to see him. There's a lot. And I explained this to my wife that I reminded her of where I was then, like Kurt Schilling made his debut, that I reminded her, as I do every time, that John Raffalides and I were in Ocean City cooking steaks in that cookout place on 45th Street that used to be Samantha's when Ben McDonald walked in from the bullpen. And we were pissed that we were in Ocean City, that they brought him in and we weren't there to see it, that we were on vacation. So I remember, and Ben's calling the game. So, like, I mean, there's a real heritage, as we've talked Gentile to Eddie Murray to Ben McDonald to what Grayson Rodriguez is. And he is the modern Ben McDonald. I mean, come on now.
No question. I mean, I was thinking about it. I was even going through it for some writing at BaltimorePositive.com. You kind of think about the Orioles over, well, even just look at the last 15 years, let alone going back further than that. When you mentioned Ben McDonald or Mike Messina making his debut against the White Sox on a
By
Sunday
the way, I'm
afternoon in
old enough to know the
1991.
difference. Let me just say this. Messina, fine. He was going to be a really good pitcher. People weren't low on him, but it wasn't what Ben was. And even when he came
No,
up, I was in the locker room. I drank beer with those guys a lot together. I mean, and Ben was always the higher ceiling guy. Always, always, always. There was more expectation that the next year he'd won 22 and Messina would be 17 and 12. There was a feeling that that's the way it was going to be. So the fact that one went to the Hall of Fame and made $150 million and the other one didn't, that's still all these years later. I don't say it weighs on Ben. God, Ben's one of my favorite people. But that on BJ Surhoff, right? On anybody who's that guy, on Adley Rutschman right now, on Matt Wieters, right? On all these guys.
I'll give you another name that you didn't even mention, Dylan Bundy. And I'm not talking about Dylan Bundy who arrived in 2016. I'm talking about Dylan Bundy when he was drafted in 2011. Talking about him when he ascended through the Orioles minor leagues in 2012. I mean, this is a guy who I think Baseball America or Baseball Prospectus had, I mean, he was kind of a consensus top 5 or top 10 prospect across baseball, but I know one of those publications at one time had him as the number 2 prospect in all of baseball. So we never saw that version of Dylan Bundy in the majors because by the time not talking about the cup of coffee he had at the end of 2012 as what, a 19-year-old, talking about when he finally arrived in 2016. That was post Tommy John. That was post some shoulder issues. He wasn't the same guy at that point in time. But to bring it back to the present day, Grayson Rodriguez for the last couple years has been a consensus top 10 prospect. He's been regarded by many as the best right-handed pitching prospect in baseball over the last 2 years. So this is more hype than Kevin Gausman, more hype than go back to the famed you know cavalry where it was Mattis and Tillman and Arrieta. Like I mean, Grayson Rodriguez is more highly regarded than any of those guys. So you have to go back to Bundy, and then certainly going back to what you mentioned, Mike Messina and Ben McDonald. Ben McDonald, one of the all-time pitching prospects in terms of how he was viewed. So, but I think Tuesday night was a reminder of that jump from even AAA to the majors is substantial. And the one thing I will say, and this is where it's going to get interesting, because Kyle Bradish is going to make a minor league rehab start for Bowie later on this week. He's close to coming back. The foot's fine. So the Orioles are going to have a decision on their hands. What I've seen from Grayson Rodriguez, even though, again, you look at the final line, doesn't look great. I don't see anything in how he pitched that tells me it's going to benefit him and what the issues that he has to figure out just as a young pitcher who's learning and continuing to develop. Those aren't issues I'm seeing that are going to be beneficial at AAA as much as going out and doing it against major league hitters. I mean, it's just that simple. He's missing bats. The stuff is there. I mean, his fastball was 96 and 98 most, just about the entire night. You see the potential with the changeup that he didn't throw a lot early, but started introducing that in about the third or fourth inning. The slider was up a little bit. That was a pitch that at times he didn't have great command of, but he's missing bats, and you see an aptitude for it. But it's just a matter of, again, when you're 0-2 or 1-2 in the minor leagues, those guys, they're done. Against someone with the stuff that he has, they're done. They don't have a shot, and that's why you saw him striking out 13 guys in 5 innings at AAA Norfolk on the regular last year before he got hurt. But and Hyde talked about this, and what was impressive to me was Grayson Rodriguez talked about this. So he had an awareness of what he needed to do better. It wasn't just, oh, I got unlucky on some 0-2 and 1-2 pitches. He flat out said, yeah, there are some pitches where I need to either not be in the strike zone quite as much when I'm ahead there and make them chase and trust my stuff and just try to blow a guy away, or, and maybe not nibble as much, or maybe need to be a little more, a little finer than I was. So, again, guys graduate from the minors. They're not a perfect finished product. They continue to develop at the major league level. And this is where I will say, I want to see him continue to pitch in the major league rotation. Does that mean he's going to be their best starter immediately?
You don't want to get killed when you're ahead in the count. You don't want to get killed when you're ahead in the count, right?
Sure.
So, like, being behind in the count's a problem when you're walking guys, right? And I mean, you can get away with that with defense and double play balls. And I mean, they have the kind of pitchers that are going to throw sinkers that they're going to be able to get away with some things, the veteran guys especially. But for him figuring this out at the major league level, maybe not even against the A's, but against the Yankees, where they got 6 guys in the middle of the lineup that'll kill you. Same thing with the Astros, right? I mean, when he's going to pitch against these better teams with bigger bats, and he'll be doing that in this division. I used to say all the time, but it's not that way anymore. So he's not going to have to run into the Blue Jays when they were the Blue Jays, with the Encarnaciones and sort of that middle of the lineup thing. But at least in the early going here, that he's managing some level of expectation that he can be outside the zone, where the strike zone is in the big leagues, what he's going to be able to get away with. He's only going to figure that out here, right? I mean, that, to your point, there's nothing to figure out when you're 5 innings in and 13 strikeouts. At that point, you're still the most dominant. You're the best kid in the game until you're not, right? And part of that is everybody feels that. Go back and look at Ben McDonald coming out of it. All of these guys, I don't know anybody. Maybe Robin Yount, I remember, came up and was just Fred Glynn, guys that come up and are just crazy and never heard from again. And it's a straight, clear path to the Hall of Fame. But it wasn't that for Greg Maddux either. or any of these guys. Kurt Schilling, I've God, my God, took him years to figure it out, and he had stuff. But I even thought, like, just for a minute, we were talking about great pitchers and stuff. Like a guy like Strasburg, right, who had all of that weight on him in the modern era and came out and sort of in the end delivered, right? I mean, that you want that path for this kid. You don't want that's why I said, where's he going to be May 15th? I hope it's not a 7 ERA. I mean, that's all. And that he's going out there and making it 4 innings every night.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I totally agree with you there. I mean, if he's getting shellacked, if he's getting hit hard, if he's behind in counts constantly, then yeah, I think it's a different story because this is a team that has designs of being in the playoff race and being a wild card and making the playoffs. So there has to be some managing of expectations to get results, but at the same time, look at the rest of the rotation right now. Dean Kramer not off to a good start. Bradish got hurt. Cole Irvin has not been very good. I mean, really, it's been Kyle Gibson who's been very good for them and as advertised as far as what they were hoping to get from a 35-year-old veteran. And Tyler Wells has been, was excellent in that emergency relief, long relief role after Bradish got hurt. Not quite as good as against the Yankees over the weekend, but the reality is this rotation is not filled with guys that are fully established. You have a couple vets, in Irvin and in Kyle Gibson, and after that, you have a bunch of guys that what they were. They were Grayson Rodriguez only a year ago, right? They were guys that were still kind of establishing themselves in the major leagues. But here's the difference. Grayson Rodriguez has so much more upside and potential than any of those other individuals. And that's why, based on what I saw on Tuesday night, again, I'm not going to sit here and say it was an outing to be happy about. He wasn't happy about it. But I think if you look at it, look beyond the box score and saw how it played out, I don't see that as something and saying, oh, he needs to go back to the minor leagues and work on this, this, and this. To me, it was, Grayson Rodriguez did, and I'm going to use a very simplistic example here. He's mastered shooting a basketball at a 9-foot rim. It's time to go up to a 10-foot. Well, you know what? You're going to have some adjustments and you're not going to be perfect at it right away. But the solution isn't to go back and shoot again at a 9-foot rim, right? So I think it really is a case of what I saw. And again, if he gets knocked around in his next start, maybe we're having a different conversation.
But
If
he's
getting
getting the
clobbered and
ball
gives
every
up,
5 days, health aside. I mean, if he gets blasted out of the first inning or something, they're
that's
probably
a
going to
different
have to do
story.
something, and it's not going to be the old days of put him in the bullpen. I mean, they don't. It will be he's got to go start somewhere else and work it out, and it's probably in his head at that point. And that's the thing that concerns me the most is
Sure.
that injury, bad spring, up anyway. Now he's here. Now he can only go backwards, right? It can only be a failure unless he can figure it out and succeed. And succeeding with a 4 ERA and going out there and making it 5 innings for the next 3 months, that's not going to be good enough either, right? So that's what I'm saying. Because that wasn't good enough for Ben McDonald was perfectly good. That's what you're right. I mean, he went out, took the ball, gave him a chance to win most nights, never really got shellacked, but he was never Greg Maddux. He was never Messina, right? And Rodriguez has this thing, this expectation, and here he is. And I just, man, I'm the voice of reason in all this and saying, cool it out. But he is going to get the ball every fifth day, and I do crossing my fingers, hope it goes well. It has to go well for the organization to go well. It's that important, right? To your point, none of the rest of these guys are the savior.
None of the rest of these guys have that number one potential, and forget number one. Let's just even say a guy that would be heralded as a number two starting pitcher for the best teams out there. So again, you don't have a rotation filled with former All-Stars or guys that are 10-year veterans or anything like that. You have a couple guys who've been around, and then the rest of these guys are not terribly different than Grayson Rodriguez. So again, based on what I saw Tuesday night, based on what he needed to do better, I don't think those are things where that's going to benefit him to go back down to AAA and try to do that. I think he needs to face major league hitters, and I think you'll see him get better, and I think you'll see him eventually excel because I think he's got that kind of makeup and he has that kind of talents. So it's a matter of having to balance a little bit of patience, but also understanding, yeah, he has to get results, and I think he understands that as much as anybody.
So here's the thing about the bong dong homer thing. I had a quip, and I'm going to put this on the radio for anybody that doesn't follow me on social media because I'm clever. That if they started doing this for great defensive plays, guys goes over the fence, Cedric Mullins, and he gets a chance because he doesn't. Some of these guys don't hit as many home runs, so they don't really get the chance to drink from it. But they're great fielders. I mean, they have the shortstop's great, right? So if you don't get to do it that way, a great defensive play, would it be a funnel of glove? No? You don't like that. I see. I knew you weren't going to like that joke. Luke, let me just say this: is your mother okay with the funnel? I mean, like, as if she is, because like your mother's of the age, she might have gone to Preakness back in the day. You know what I mean? Like drinking beer out of this is not a new concept. So all of you old farts my age pretending that didn't happen on Kane Street or at the Heritage Fair or at the Preakness or at the beach because it did, or at the beach house or Senior Week or anything else. But it is the hydration part of it, and it's clever, and I like it more than the pies, and I'm just going to say that. That's all.
It's fun, look, I understand some of the concern. I mean, and if the Orioles took it to the next step and started shotgunning cans of Gatorade or something, like, okay, then maybe we'd need to have a
Like the
conversation.
Maryland
And
chick with the beer?
yeah, exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I'll also say this: I would not be shocked, and I don't know this. This was my initial reaction when I first saw it Monday night. And look, I laughed for 10 minutes straight in the press box. It was one of the funniest things I've seen. I mean, my goodness,
You got a sense of humor about all that. You like Dumb
Mountcastle
and Dumber. You got that sense of humor.
Mountcastle even got down on his knees. It just reminded me of a college frat boy funneling a beer. But I, I wouldn't be shocked if someone up the chain, as far as the powers that be, whether it's with the Orioles or Major League Baseball, eventually puts an end to it. I think they're trying to, calling it the Homer hose rather than the dong bong, I think is, it's kind of like your buddy who is trying to cover, you're going out to a party as a high school senior or something like that, and it's your buddy that's trying to smooth it over with your parents, right? Hey, it's a birthday gathering. There's going to be cake and cookies and punch.
It
There's
just
not going to be any
happened to be
alcohol there when
4:20 in the afternoon on April 20th. It wasn't really even that kind of
exactly,
party, Mo.
exactly. So,
You know?
so in all serious, and look, I think there is a fine line that you want to be careful, but at the same time, these guys are having some fun. They're drinking water. It's not like it's a
But
beer
these
league
guys have
softball game.
famously drank beer. By the way, Wes Moore all but did the beer on the head. Did you see that?
I did. I
Yeah,
did.
yeah. I mean, like shotgunning a beer and the football players doing it and like all that. It's water. I mean, get a sponsor for it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, and these are young guys, and I don't listen. There's never a point where like I ran into Mike Elias. They've denied my press credentials this week. I want to say that because people always ask me, "Do you apply?" Yes, we apply, and I get denied, and I don't brag about it on the radio show or the internet. But I'd like to know these guys, and they seem like Adley Rutschman seems like a good enough guy. I'll say this: Mike Elias. I was in a room with him for 3 hours the other day. And I even text you. I'm like, it was impressive. He seemed like a decent fellow. Um, so fair enough. But meanwhile, the owner's a creep, and I'll go on with that because the owner's been a creep out in front of everybody. So you can judge it for wherever you are. Dan Connolly, the son, lying, all of it, right? There's no lease, all of that, right? But for the players and for the organization and for the dong bong, the funnel of glove or the Homer hose, whatever you want to call it, I don't think they're going to pitch well this year. And I think it's a good thing they cut the pitch clock into this because these would have been the 4.5 hour. They're going to play some 14 they're going to play some softball games here because this team can hit and they move the fence back now. And even if it doesn't go over the fence, they'll hit it in front of the fence and run around the bases and drive in runs. And they're going to challenge pitchers on this 2-pitch thing. The shift. I didn't get a chance to have a follow-up with Mike Elias because I think they thought I was going to hijack him. And I did ask Mike a question in front of everyone, and it really had to do with building something from scratch. That many times he alluded to the fact of how torched earth it was. And I wanted to know how appealing that was to him, that this thing got built from nothing and all that they did. But my follow-up to him on all of this just would have been about the type of people, because he went on about how much he liked the people in the organization. I'm like, you pick them. I mean, we're in a room of CEOs. You picked these people. You went out and scouted all these people, and you saw not just Adley Rutschman being a 1-1, but you saw leadership in him. And there were things you saw in these people that might fit them together in a good way. And I see these kids hanging out, drinking beer together, walking the city together during the rain out, taking pictures with fans on my Facebook, whatever. Stoughton was involved, like, and there was a real concern in the room about Stoughton. They get said, like, he's one of ours, bring him back up, the whole deal, that there is a little bit of a camaraderie building here that I feel that I don't want to say I didn't align with Adam Jones and the pie in the face and all of that in that era. And how I'm personally treated is offensive to me. It always has been. And that's how I walked out on to begin with, because I wasn't going to peddle their bullshit and their lies 20 years ago. But this group, it's fun. There's nobody there. I mean, it feels like you're early on the train. If you get on, there's plenty of seats. This is like like Tony Kornheiser's bandwagon. There's room for people to get on. Now, recruit me. Make my wife want to come down to the game. Make my wife ask me who Ben McDonald is, which she did the other night. I mean, and I told her stories about Ben and Brad Pennington taking me out for Tokyo to Benihana for some Tokyo love back in 1994 in Toronto. But I like those guys. I still like Chris Hoyles. Mike Bordick and I are doing several charity events together. I like those people, and I know what it's like to like Jack Voigt, to still be a friend of Brad Pennington all these years later, to really like these people. And I feel like you're in there. I like these guys. They seem like good guys.
They are. They are. And I want to piggyback on something you just mentioned. I mean, look, Grayson Rodriguez, this was the biggest debut of an Orioles pitching prospect in a long time. Keep in mind, Bundy never really had the he never really had the true debut because he was in the bullpen because of circumstances of how his career had gone. Gausman made his first couple starts on the road before he debuted at Camden Yards in 2013. So, you've really got to go back and kind of think about that.
Well, let me say this too. The Jimmy Hayneses and the Rocky Coppingers and those guys, they all came up in a rotation with Key and Messina. And like when those guys came up, they weren't the savior. They were like a really nice pitcher, but hey, Ben McDonald's in the rotation, so, buck up. You know what I mean? You're another guy here because we've got a $10 million arm and Sutcliffe's got a pelt. So, like, there was always that. There's a lot riding on this kid. And to your point, if you want to keep up with the Yankees, you want to keep up with this has to pan out.
It does, but the point I was trying to make though was it was only 12,000 people there. And look, it's Oakland, April, Tuesday night. I mean, you're delusional if you think there's going to be a sellout. So let's be very clear about that. However, it does speak to as rabid as the fan base that's paying attention is right now. And I think it is. I think you have a lot of people who are really excited, but that is still a small base from which you're dealing right now when you see only 12,000 people there for Grayson Rodriguez. When they announced Saturday morning that they were giving away his T-shirt for his home debut,
and they did cheap tickets for
night.
That night months ago. They did a really, it was $10 to get in kind of night if you bought a ticket on the, you know what I mean? And it was 80 degrees. There were a lot of reasons to go down there. There really were.
In the right center bleachers, that was the one part of the ballpark. It wasn't filled, it wasn't packed, but it was filled up very nicely. Rest of the park, not so much. The point I'm trying to make is not to pick on them as much as to just state the obvious that they still have a long way to go in that department. And this team is fun. They're hitting home runs. I think they'll play good defense, even though they haven't so far this year. I'm basing that off of last year. The pitching's going to be a question, especially, I have my concerns about the middle relief big time right now. But it's a fun product, as far as how they're playing, young guys, celebrations. Hey, don't forget the home run chain. That is not their celebration anymore, but you go look in the seating bowl, kids are wearing those. So again, think about some of these things. And I'm not saying you're going to see kids funneling soda from the stands, but there's a lot about this team to like, but they still have a ways to go, and that's where you look at the attendance and say they still have a ways to go. Because on a night like Tuesday night with Grayson Rodriguez, that kind of a pitching prospect, you'd like to think you could get 20,000 people there. And that we're not talking about filling the ballpark there. 20,000, that's not a high bar. But it feels like a high bar still, and it does speak to they still have a ways to go, and a lot of damage has been done that they're still recovering from, quite frankly. And it's where they need to keep working hard from a business standpoint in selling tickets. And they certainly need these guys to continue to play well and do the things that we saw Ryan Mountcastle do on Tuesday night, tying an Oriole record with 9 RBIs.
Might be time to write TJ Brightman and John Angelos a little love letter while, before draft day. Luke Jones is here. He writes a love letter to the Orioles and the Ravens every single day. And sometimes it's tough love because we're journalists around here. And we like to ask the questions about, are we allowed to ask questions about Odell Beckham Jr.? Let's make sure, ask Chad if that's okay next week when that all happens here. But Odell Beckham Jr. is in the fall. We talk a lot of football around here, but when the baseball team makes magic, we follow that as well. Luke's following all that magic and some of the tragic out at the Castle. By the way, it's still on fire. They have a quarterback that they don't have under full contract who hasn't shined the sheet, and like all that's going on. We got a draft coming up in 2 weeks. Plenty happening. You can follow Luke, follow WNST. Any breaking news happens first on the WNST tech service, all brought to you by our friends at Coons Baltimore Ford. Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home, and again on Sunday morning as well. I will be at Pappas and Bel Air on Thursday, setting up new crab cake tours. 27th, we're going to be at a new location. We're going to be at Captain Larry's downtown in Federal Hill. And then we're going back to Fatley's on the 28th because we couldn't get there this week and lining up things. But the crab cake tour is alive and well. It's all presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. They got new Frogger scratch offs, so they gave me these to give away. I was more of a Pac-Man guy myself, but this is a fun game. My wife likes this one. And go play. And play responsibly, as we like to tell everybody. And I don't really understand all the baseball betting thing. I'm going to have to ask Luke about what plus 380 means against the parlay. I'm lost, but I'm learning. It's like a horse racing form. I need Clem Florio around here. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.